You know, there is a very specific sound that arrogance makes right before it gets absolutely humbled. It's not a scream, not yet, but a sharp, dismissive scoff, the kind of noise Brenda Vance made the second she pressed her manicured hand against the weathered wood of my barn door. She stood there in her power suit and heels that cost more than my tractor, looking me dead in the eye, and sneered that no rustic cowboy with a grandfathered property deed was going to stop the supreme authority of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. And folks, that was the exact second the honey badger hit the door from the inside like a living thunderbolt wrapped in fur and fury. The cameras she had brought along, her little entourage of clipboard-wielding minions she called the Compliance Committee, caught the exact moment her smug smile melted into pure, unadulterated horror. She realized, in a heartbeat that probably felt like an hour, that she hadn't just started a property dispute. She had declared war on the one creature on God's green earth that fears absolutely nothing. Not chains, not threats, not lawsuits, and certainly not Brenda. In that split second of silence before her first blood-curdling scream ripped through the morning air, I knew this wasn't just a spat about zoning codes anymore. This was the beginning of a legend that was going to echo through this county for a generation. But let me back up a little, so you understand how we got to the point where a suburban queen bee was facing off against a rescue animal in a barn she had no business being near. It started on a Tuesday, early, when the sun was just peeling itself off the horizon and the dew was still clinging to the tall grass like silver beads. My place, the old Miller Ranch, sits right on the edge of the Whispering Pines development. I was here first. My family's been working this dirt for 80 years, but the suburbs grew around us like kudzu. Brenda Vance, the HOA president, never understood that. She didn't speak the language of the land. She only spoke the language of control, domination, and that sick little thrill some people get from forcing their will onto places that don't belong to them. She strutted across my gravel driveway that morning, creating a cloud of dust that settled on her pristine shoes, which seemed to offend her personally. She had 3 people trailing her, phones out, recording vertically, ready to document my noncompliance. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the same feeling you get when the barometer drops and you know a storm is brewing, and there's nothing you can do but batten down the hatches. I tried to be neighborly. I walked out to meet her, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. I told her, "Calm as I'm talking to you now. Brenda, the barn is off limits. You know this. It houses a protected animal under rehabilitation. It's not a community center. It's not a shed for your inspection, and it sure as hell isn't under your jurisdiction." But Brenda just laughed. It was a sharp, metallic sound, like tin snips cutting sheet metal. She called me dramatic. She called me paranoid. She said I was undeserving of a leadership role in a civilized neighborhood, which was rich coming from a woman who treated a trash can left out 10 minutes too long as a federal crime. She claimed she was responding to anonymous complaints about unsafe conditions, which I knew was a lie because the only thing unsafe in that barn was the creature she was so desperate to disturb. I noticed something, though. While she was nodding to her followers to get my hostile reaction on film, she wouldn't look directly at the barn. It was like some reptilian part of her brain knew that behind those oak planks lived something that didn't answer to bylaws or fines. I tried one last time. I stepped between her and the door. I said, "Brenda, walk away. Let this go. Respect the boundary." But pride is a funny thing. It swallows you whole. She couldn't retreat, not in front of her audience. She stepped right up to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and bitter, and whispered, "I'm not afraid of your fairy tales or your farm theatrics, Hank. I'm going to show this whole neighborhood what a real inspection looks like." She slapped my hand away from the latch. She yanked at the lock with this theatrical irritation, making a show of how easily she intended to dismantle my authority. And when that lock snapped free and hit the dirt with a dull clang, I felt a strange mix of dread and inevitability wash over me. It was like watching a drunk driver ignore a bridge-out sign. She flung the door open, took one proud step into the dim interior, and announced to her phone camera, "See? Nothing here but dust and exaggeration." And that was when the growl started. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a hiss. It was a low, guttural vibration that rolled out of the darkness like thunder trapped in a box. It vibrated through the floorboards, up through the soles of her shoes, and froze every smirk in that group solid. Brenda's eyes went wide for one absurd half-second before her brain could process that the darkness was moving. Buster, that's the badger, moved with terrifying speed. He's a rescue, saved from an illegal trafficking ring, and he's got some trauma, which manifests as pure territorial aggression when strangers invade his safe space. He hit the floorboards like a cannonball, claws scraping wood, charging not to kill, but to dominate. Brenda let out a screech that I'm pretty sure startled birds in the next county. She stumbled backward, her heels catching in the soft dirt, tripping over her own arrogance. Her lawyers-in-waiting fumbled their phones, capturing shaky footage of the HOA president scrambling on all fours like a crab, dirt smearing across her designer slacks, terror etched into her pearl-perfect face. I shouted, "Get out! Move!" But the chaos had already erupted. In that storm of noise, splintering wood, flailing limbs, hysterical voices, I realized this wasn't just an incident. This was a turning point. As Brenda clawed her way free, scrambling into the tall grass, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, I stood there silent. The damage was done. The image was captured. She spun around, hair wild, pointing a shaking finger at me. You weaponized a wild animal. You planned this. That is an act of violence against an HOA official." I just looked at her, watching her try to reconstruct her dignity out of broken pride and dirt. All I could think was that sometimes the universe doesn't punish arrogance with karma. Sometimes it sends a honey badger. Brenda didn't go home to hide in shame. Any rational person, after nearly getting their ankles nipped by a creature that fights lions for fun, would take a few days off. But Brenda didn't have retreat in her vocabulary. She only knew escalate. She flailed upright, brushing the filth off her clothes with frantic, aggressive motions, shouting at her minions, who were still filming, that this was a calculated trap and a disgusting display of rural barbarism. By noon, I had a cease and desist notice taped to my gate. By 2 p.m., she had edited the footage. And that's where the real war began. The video that went out to the neighborhood email list was a masterpiece of fiction. She cut the part where I warned her. She cut the part where she broke the lock. She only kept the scream, the charge, and her brave escape. The narrative she spun was immediate and toxic. I was a deranged recluse harboring dangerous, illegal beasts to terrorize the good citizens of Whispering Pines. The speed at which her fiction spread was impressive. Neighbors who used to wave at me when I drove the tractor now stared from behind half-closed curtains. Whispers trailed me like smoke. Brenda basked in it. She played the bruised martyr perfectly, wearing a wrist brace that she definitely didn't need, talking about PTSD and unsafe environments. That evening, just as the sun was dipping low and painting the fields in that soft gold light, I heard tires on gravel again. Brenda was back, but this time, she brought a local code enforcement officer. She stepped out of her SUV with the air of a conquering general, launching into a dramatic explanation of zoning misconduct and animal endangerment. She spoke fast, sharp, using words like trauma and psychological harm as weapons. The officer, a guy named Mike who I'd known for years, looked tired. He glanced at me with an expression that balanced curiosity and confusion. "She says you're running an illegal zoo, Hank," Mike said, keeping his voice low. I didn't argue. I just calmly handed him the wildlife authorization documents, the veterinary care records, and the state-issued protected species notices I kept in a fireproof safe in the barn office. Brenda scoffed. "Oh, please. Anyone can print papers off the internet. The HOA override clause supersedes state permits when safety is at risk." Mike scanned the papers, silent and careful. He looked at Brenda, then back at the papers. "Ma'am," he said, "honey badgers fall under specific conservation classifications. These papers are federal. Your HOA bylaws don't override federal law. The violation here isn't ownership, it's disturbance." You could see the gears grinding in her head. She waved him off, actually waved a hand in a police officer's face, dismissing his knowledge as irrelevant. "Then I'll get the barn condemned. I'll have the property re-evaluated for community disruption." She stormed off, her heels crunching the gravel like she wanted to hurt the stones. The air felt heavy after she left, thick with the promise of a legal hurricane. I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't fighting for safety. She was fighting to prove she mattered. The next few days were a blur of harassment. Drones hovered over my property line, buzzing like angry hornets. Brenda organized safety walks, where she'd lead groups of concerned mothers along my fence line, pointing at my barn like it was a nuclear reactor leaking radiation. Then came the emergency meeting. Attendance was mandatory. Fines threatened for non-participation. She held it in the community center, standing under those harsh fluorescent lights with a slideshow clicker in her hand. She projected distorted images of my property, cherry-picked frames of Buster looking menacing, which, to be fair, is just how he looks. She claimed she couldn't sleep. She claimed property values were plummeting because of the monster next door. I went. I had to. Seeing her up there, twisting the truth so effortlessly, was surreal. When I stood up to speak, citing the trespass and the warnings, she just smirked. She whispered to her inner circle that I was a liar, that rural people admire drama. The vote was swift. The board, terrified of her wrath, voted to impose temporary restrictions on my property usage and demanded an independent audit of the barn's safety. It was a kangaroo court. I left that meeting feeling the ground shift, not physically, but symbolically. She was trying to isolate me, to paint me as a cancer in my own home. But Brenda made a mistake. She thought the world ended at the gates of Whispering Pines. The morning of the independent inspection, which she insisted on attending, 2 unmarked government SUVs rolled up my driveway. But they weren't there for me. They were from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. See, when Brenda filed her formal complaint, she had to attach evidence. She included the unedited video of herself breaking into the barn to prove she was there. She handed the authorities proof of her own crime. Brenda was waiting by the barn, wearing a hard hat she bought for the occasion, looking ready to demolish my life. When the agents stepped out, she rushed them, talking a mile a minute. Finally, "You're here to seize the beast." The lead agent, a woman with zero patience for suburban theatrics, held up a hand. "Ms. Vance, we're responding to reports of disturbance of a protected wildlife habitat. We have video evidence of you breaking and entering a federally licensed rehabilitation enclosure." Brenda froze. Her smile faltered, twitching at the corners. I was inspecting for safety. The HOA has no jurisdiction over federally protected species. The agent cut her off. "You are being cited for harassment of wildlife and trespassing on a conservation easement. The fine is $5,000 per incident. And if you approach this barn again, we will pursue criminal charges." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Her loyal supporters shifted uneasily, taking half steps away from her. The color drained from Brenda's face, leaving her looking like a wax statue left out in the heat. You'd think she would stop there. You'd think the threat of federal prison would be a wake-up call. But narcissism is a hell of a drug. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. She spun the narrative again. She went online, posting videos claiming the government was corrupt and that I had bribed the agents. She called herself a whistleblower. She started a GoFundMe for her legal defense against the deep state and the badger. It got ridiculous. Barnstorm Karen, the internet called her. The nickname stuck. Local news picked it up. Reporters were camped out on the easement, trying to get a comment. I stayed quiet, letting her dig her own grave. But behind the scenes, the community was waking up. That fine she got. She paid it using the HOA emergency fund. That was the thread that unraveled the whole sweater. An anonymous neighbor, let's call him Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant who hated noise, noticed the withdrawal. He posted a simple question on the community board. Why did the HOA pay Ms. Vance's personal federal fine? Brenda exploded. She called him a traitor. She deleted the post. But the internet is forever. Screenshots circulated. People started looking at the books. They found receipts for administrative lunches that looked a lot like spa days. They found consulting fees paid to her brother-in-law's non-existent security firm. The atmosphere in Whispering Pines shifted from fear to fury. A petition for a forensic audit started circulating. Brenda felt the walls closing in. She became erratic. I'd see her pacing the fence line at night, staring at the barn, muttering. She looked less like a queen and more like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own kingdom. She needed a win. She needed to prove the badger was dangerous to justify everything she had done. That's what led to the midnight raid. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, almost a month after the first incident. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the ranch pitch black. I was asleep, but my motion sensors weren't. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Alert, barn interior. I grabbed my boots and a flashlight, heart hammering. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone as I ran. It was Brenda. She was inside the enclosure again. She was wearing dark clothes, holding a high-powered flashlight, and what looked like a taser. She was poking at Buster's nesting box, whispering frantically, trying to get him to attack so she could film it. "Come on, you little monster," I heard her hiss through the audio feed. "Show them what you are." She wanted to provoke him. She wanted footage of a vicious attack to save her reputation. But Buster is smarter than her. He didn't just attack. He flanked her. I burst through the barn doors just as it happened. Buster had circled behind her in the shadows. He let out that roar, that same terrifying, prehistoric sound. Brenda spun around, blinding herself with her own flashlight reflection off a metal bucket. She slipped. It was almost poetic. She slipped on the fresh straw I had laid down that morning. She went down hard, dropping the taser, dropping her phone. Buster charged, stopping inches from her face, snapping his jaws. He didn't bite her. He didn't need to. He just reminded her where she stood on the food chain. Brenda scrambled backward, screaming, crab-walking all the way to the door where I was standing. She looked up at me, wild-eyed, dirt in her hair, the taser lying uselessly in the hay. "Help me," she shrieked. I looked at her, then at Buster, who was standing his ground, looking almost proud. "Get out, Brenda," I said quietly. Before I let him finish the conversation, she ran. She left her phone. She left the taser. She left her dignity in the dirt. The next morning, the police weren't called by her. They were called by me. I handed over everything. The security footage of her breaking in with a weapon. Her phone, which she had unlocked in her panic, revealing texts to her brother-in-law about how to get rid of the animal. The audit results that Mr. Henderson had finalized that morning. The court case was less of a trial and more of a public dismantling. Brenda walked into that courtroom with her head high, but she left it broken. The judge watched the video of her trying to taser a protected animal in silence. He reviewed the financial records showing she'd embezzled nearly $50,000 to fund her lifestyle and her vendettas. When the verdict came down, it was devastating. She was removed from the HOA board immediately. She was barred from holding any leadership position in a nonprofit organization in the state. She was ordered to pay restitution for the embezzled funds, plus punitive damages to me for harassment. And she was issued a permanent restraining order, 500 feet from my property, forever. She sat there as the gavel banged, staring at her hands. The queen was dead. The fallout was swift. Whispering Pines held an emergency election. Mr. Henderson took over. The first thing they did was repeal all of Brenda's aesthetic enforcement policies. People started planting gardens again. Kids played in the streets without fear of fines. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. Brenda didn't move away, though. That's the strange part. She stayed. But she was a pariah. She walked her dog alone. People crossed the street to avoid her. She became a cautionary tale, a ghost in the machine she used to operate. Months passed. The seasons turned. The barn stood quiet, peaceful. Buster went back to sleeping 16 hours a day, unaware he was a local hero. Then, one evening in late autumn, I was fixing a fence post near the road. The sun was setting, casting those long, purple shadows. I saw a figure walking down the shoulder of the road. It was Brenda. She looked different. No power suit. No makeup. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that looked a size too big. She stopped about 10 feet away. She didn't cross the line. She knew the boundary now. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I'm sorry," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a performance. It was quiet. Her voice cracked a little on the second word. "I lost everything," she said, looking at the ground. "My friends. My reputation. My own respect. I thought if I controlled everything, nothing could hurt me. But I just ended up hurting everyone else." I leaned on my shovel. "You did a lot of damage, Brenda." "I know," she whispered. "I'm seeing a therapist. I'm paying back the money. I'm trying to learn how to just be." She looked up at the barn, then back at me. "Can I ask, is he okay? The badger?" "He's fine," I said. "He's just being a badger. He doesn't hold grudges. He just protects his space." She nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "I think he taught me more in 5 seconds than I learned in 50 years. She turned to walk away, shoulders slumped, a lonely figure against the darkening sky. "Brenda," I called out. She stopped. You stay on your side of the line, I said, firm but not unkind. But if you wave next time you drive by, I might wave back. She stood there for a second, tears shimmering in her eyes, then nodded and walked on. The community is different now. We have a plaque on the barn door, not to celebrate the conflict, but to mark the lesson. It just says, respect the wild. The ranch is a sanctuary now. Schools come for tours. We teach kids about boundaries, about respect for nature, and about how true power isn't forcing your will on others. It's having the strength to stand your ground without needing to shout. Brenda is still around. She volunteers at the library shelving books. She's quiet. She's humble. I think, in a way, losing everything was the only way she could find herself. She had to be broken down to the studs to be rebuilt into something real. So, here's the question I want to leave you folks with tonight. We all know a Brenda. Maybe we've even been a Brenda a time or two, convinced we're right, convinced we have to control the chaos. But when the honey badger of life comes charging at you, stripping away your ego and your illusions, do you double down? Do you fight the truth? Or do you finally, actually listen? Because the walls we build to keep others out usually just end up locking us in. And sometimes, the thing we're most afraid of, losing control, is the only thing that can set us free. Let me know what you'd have done in the comments. Would you have forgiven her? Or are some lines just crossed too far to ever come back? Stay wild, folks. And for God's sake, don't touch the barn door.